The early morning sky over Atlanta was as clear as if it had been washed clean by an overnight rain. The international airport was crowded, but moved with its usual rhythm. The loudspeaker announcements echoing across the terminals, the clatter of rolling suitcases over the gleaming tile floors, and the constant weave of hurried travelers. Amidst the noisy atmosphere, Layla Robinson and her younger brother, Noah Robinson, quietly made their way through the boarding gate, their young hearts brimming with excitement. Today was a special day, the first time in their lives they would be sitting in first class. At 16, Layla had a calm and thoughtful demeanor. She carefully tucked her small backpack under the seat in front of her, then turned to help Noah, just 14 years old, fasten his seatbelt. Both were dressed simply, but neatly, Layla in an elegant white blouse and light blue jeans, and Noah in a gray hoodie and beige khakis. Noah's eyes lit up as he pressed his face against the window, watching the other airplanes slowly taxiing along the runway. His excitement seemed to fill his every movement, while Layla simply smiled gently, her heart swelling with pride and responsibility. This was more than just a flight, it was a milestone in their journey toward growing up. This trip was a reward from their father, Brandon Robinson, for their hard work throughout the year. It was a gift that represented not just love, but a deep trust that his children deserved the best things in life. The first-class seats were spacious and plush, wrapping around their bodies in a comforting embrace that felt both unfamiliar and soothing. The cabin was quiet, bathed in soft lighting that seemed to caress the soul. Layla opened a travel magazine, gently flipping through its pages, while Noah watched with fascination as the flight attendants bustled about preparing for departure. However, amidst this calm flow, a sudden chill crept into the air. A woman, tall, impeccably dressed in uniform, was walking slowly down the aisle. On the name tag pinned to her chest, the bold letters read, "Christine Parker, Chief Flight Attendant." Christine walked with an air of authority, her sharp gaze sweeping the cabin as if silently judging every passenger. Years of experience in the industry had given Christine confidence in her ability to sense what belonged and what, in her view, did not belong in first class. Her gaze halted when it landed on Layla and Noah. In that brief moment, the polite smile on her face disappeared instantly. In its place was a frown that barely concealed her suspicion. She quickly glanced around the cabin, as if expecting someone else, an adult, a more worthy figure, to appear and explain the presence of the two children. No one came. Christine took a deep breath, then marched straight toward Layla. The sound of her heels tapping on the floor rang out coldly in the otherwise quiet first-class cabin. She stopped right next to Layla's seat, cleared her throat sharply, loud enough for surrounding passengers to glance over. "Excuse me, are you sure you're sitting in the right seats?" Christine's voice cut through the air, cold and brimming with doubt. Layla looked up, momentarily startled by the question, but she quickly composed herself, politely pulling out two boarding passes clearly marked, "First Class Seat 1A and 1B," and handed them to Christine. "Yes, Mum, these are our tickets," Layla replied softly, her voice carrying a hint of confidence and the courtesy her father had instilled in her since childhood. Christine snatched the tickets, her eyes skimming over the printed words, but instead of being satisfied, her face grew even more clouded with skepticism. She handed the tickets back to Layla, the gesture now lacking any pretense of politeness, then tilted her head and asked further, her voice lowering with heavy insinuation, "Where are your parents? Are they flying with you?" Layla shook her head lightly, trying to maintain her composure despite a growing unease. "No, ma'am, we're flying alone today. Our father booked the tickets for us," she answered, her voice growing smaller under Christine's scrutinizing stare. Christine clasped her hands tightly in front of her abdomen, standing like a judge ready to deliver a verdict. She lifted her chin high, looking directly at Layla and Noah, then raised her voice slightly enough to draw attention from other passengers. "First class is reserved for qualified passengers. I need to verify this. There may have been a mistake. without waiting for a response. Christine turned sharply and marched toward the front of the cabin, leaving Layla and Noah frozen in place, feeling the weight of the surrounding stares curious, sympathetic, and tinged with silent judgment. Layla gently squeezed Noah's hand, offering him a reassuring smile, but inside, an unsettling wave churned within her, confusion, embarrassment, and a creeping worry that this sweet journey might be drifting into unknown, unwelcome territory. She had no idea that this was merely the beginning of a journey that would forever change the way she saw the world. Layla tried to maintain her composure as Christine Parker briskly made her way toward the front of the cabin. The coldness in the chief flight attendant's gaze and voice still echoed in her ears, like a sharp but subtle cut. Noah, sitting beside her, shrank into himself, his eyes staring aimlessly out the window. But Layla knew he was confused and anxious. The once luxurious first-class cabin now felt like a glass cage, where every stare pricked them like invisible needles. Layla placed her hand on Noah's and gave it a gentle squeeze. She didn't want her brother to see the worry in her heart. Noah glanced at her, searching her face for reassurance, and as always, Layla smiled a steady smile that only the two siblings could truly understand. From afar, Layla could see Christine speaking rapidly with another crew member, a passenger list in her hand, her face marked with doubt. Without hearing the words, Layla could easily guess they were discussing her and Noah. Just a few minutes later, Christine returned, her face now devoid of any earlier courtesy. Her eyes were stern, her steps decisive, as if she had reached an irrevocable conclusion. She stopped in front of Layla and Noah, and the entire first-class cabin seemed to sink into a tense silence. "I'm sorry, but there has clearly been a mistake," Christine said loudly, her cold gaze sweeping over the two children. "You must move immediately to economy class. This is a first-class cabin, reserved for eligible passengers." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Some passengers glanced at Layla and Noah with sympathetic eyes, while others quietly lowered their heads, pretending to focus intently on their phones or magazines, as if wishing to avoid being involved in this uncomfortable scene. Layla was momentarily speechless. She clutched the boarding passes again, her hands trembling slightly, and offered them once more to Christine. "Ma'am, our tickets clearly show our seat numbers. Our father bought these tickets for us, and we have the right to sit here," Layla said, her voice soft but clear, struggling to maintain the last shreds of dignity. Christine merely glanced at the tickets perfunctorily, then shook her head firmly. "The tickets could have been printed incorrectly, or maybe your parents misunderstood the policy. Either way, you're delaying the departure process. Please move to the back immediately." There was no choice. Layla swallowed her humiliation. She gently signaled Noah to gather their belongings, and the boy's small shoulders visibly quivered. The stairs continued to close in around them, silent, yet heavier than any whisper. Christine stepped aside, arms crossed over her chest, her posture exuding the air of someone who had just completed a necessary duty. Without a trace of discomfort or regret, Layla walked ahead, Noah quietly following. His small backpack swung behind him as if carrying the shared burden of their shame. With each step down the aisle, Layla could feel the burning gazes on her back, the small murmurs, and the wild, chaotic pounding of her own heart. It wasn't until the door separating first class and economy closed behind them that Layla allowed herself a long, ragged breath, a breath heavy and bitter enough to bring tears to her eyes. In the economy cabin, Layla found two empty seats near the back of the plane. She and Noah sat down quietly, avoiding the curious glances from the new group of passengers. Noah fumbled with his seatbelt, his hands trembling. Then he whispered, his voice cracking, "Layla, sis, did we do something wrong?" Layla turned to him, her eyes tender yet filled with pain. She gently brushed his hair back and shook her head. "No, Noah, we didn't do anything wrong," she whispered. But inside, confusion, anger, and humiliation tangled within her like a tightly knotted mesh she couldn't undo. Unable to hold back any longer, she pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling as she typed a message to their father. "Dad, something bad happened. A flight attendant didn't believe our tickets and forced us to move to economy. We don't understand why." As soon as the message was sent, Layla set her phone in her lap and hugged herself tightly, as if trying to shield herself from the world. She didn't know how her father would react. She only knew that, in that moment, the feeling of being judged, being evaluated solely based on appearances, had left a deep, indelible wound within her. Back in first class, Christine Parker was lazily pouring herself a cup of coffee. A look of satisfaction spread across her face, thinking she had just preserved the order of the VIP cabin. A younger colleague, Emily Torres, hesitated as she approached, quietly asking, "Christine, are you absolutely sure those kids didn't belong in first class?" Christine raised an eyebrow, smirking arrogantly. "Look at them. Do they look like VIP passengers to you? Trust me, I did the right thing." But what Christine didn't know was that the message Layla had just sent was like a tiny spark, about to ignite a wildfire powerful enough to alter her entire fate. The airplane gently glided along the runway, preparing for takeoff. The entire cabin was bathed in soft light, and the whispering voices gradually faded. But in a small corner of the economy section, Layla's heart was still pounding wildly. She stared intently at the screen of her phone, as if a single signal from her father would be enough to rescue her and Noah from the humiliation that was tightening around them. Just a few minutes later, the phone screen lit up. A short message from Mr. Brandon Robinson appeared. "Stay calm. I'm handling it. Don't worry." Just 6 words, but each one felt like an invisible shield, protecting Layla and Noah from the storm swirling inside them. Layla placed her hand gently on Noah's shoulder and whispered, "It's going to be okay. Dad knows. Everything will be fine." Noah looked up, his eyes a mix of hope and doubt, then nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but the steadiness in his sister's voice was enough for him to cling to. Meanwhile, in first class, Christine Parker was savoring what she believed to be a moment of restored order. With a cup of hot coffee in hand, she lazily made her final rounds before takeoff, completely unaware that her recent actions had been recorded and noticed at a level far beyond her authority. From the cockpit, the internal phone rang, a sound not often heard during takeoff preparations. Captain Michael Simmons, a seasoned pilot, frowned as he picked up the receiver. "This is Simmons," he said in a calm, steady voice. On the other end, the voice of the ground operations coordinator came through, urgent yet professional. "Captain Simmons, we've received an emergency call from the executive board. They request a 5-minute delay for takeoff to handle a special situation. Senior management demands an immediate direct call with the chief flight attendant." Michael looked up, his expression heavy. He had flown thousands of flights, but rarely encountered such urgent directives, especially right before leaving the runway. Without hesitation, he pressed the intercom button. "Christine Parker, please report to the cockpit immediately." Christine heard the signal and felt a flash of irritation. In her mind, she thought, probably just paperwork or an overweight luggage issue. Taking a final sip of her coffee, Christine adjusted her cap and strode confidently toward the cockpit. But the moment she opened the door and stepped inside, the atmosphere inside the flight deck made her freeze. Captain Simmons and First Officer Laura Chen sat upright, their faces solemn. On the screen in front of them appeared the image of Monica Hughes, Senior Director of Discipline, and beside her was Mr. Brandon Robinson, the most powerful CEO Christine had only heard about in high-level meetings. A cold shiver ran down Christine's spine. "Ms. Parker," Monica Hughes began, her voice low but sharper than any sound Christine had ever heard. "We have just received a direct complaint from the chairman of the board, Mr. Brandon Robinson." Christine swallowed hard, her back stiffening. "Mr. Robinson reported that to passengers, Layla Robinson and Noah Robinson, his children, were subjected to discriminatory treatment, publicly humiliated, and removed from their rightful seats without any verification beyond their appearances. Each word from Monica struck directly at the fragile remains of Christine's pride. She opened her mouth, trying to defend herself, but Mr. Robinson's voice cut in. Slow and deliberate from the screen, "Christine Parker, I want to hear it from you. Why did you think my children didn't deserve to sit in first class?" There was no room to hide. Christine's eyes wavered. She grasped desperately for a flimsy excuse. "Sir, I was just following procedure. I thought there was a mistake. They didn't look like the typical first-class passengers," she stammered. Silence filled the cockpit. No further words were needed. Her admission spoke volumes. Mr. Robinson did not raise his voice, nor show anger. He simply sat there, chillingly calm, then said slowly, "We do not judge customers by appearance. We judge by facts." A simple statement, but one that crushed every ounce of arrogance Christine had clung to. Monica Hughes delivered the verdict, her voice as cold as ice, effective immediately. "You are to issue a public apology to the 2 passengers in front of the entire cabin. Then, personally escort them back to their rightful seats in first class. We will discuss further disciplinary action after the plane lands." Christine stood frozen, her knees nearly buckling. She knew the greatest storm of her life had truly begun. Leaving the cockpit, every step Christine took felt like sinking into lead. She dared not lift her head to meet the eyes of the passengers, keeping her gaze downcast. Hands clenched tightly round the hem of her uniform. Layla and Noah still sat quietly in a corner of the economy cabin, saying nothing. But their innocent, wounded eyes pierced Christine's mind like a blade. She took a deep breath, then crouched low in front of the 2 children. "Miss Robinson, Master Robinson." Her voice trembled. "I was wrong. I sincerely apologize to both of you. May I escort you back to first class, where you rightfully belong?" Layla looked directly at Christine. Her eyes were not angry, not hateful, just an impenetrable calmness, far too mature for a 16-year-old. After a few seconds of silence, Layla gently nodded. Without another word, the 2 siblings gathered their belongings and followed behind Christine, while the entire cabin fell into a hushed silence, watching every small but proud step they took. The entire cabin fell into a deep, heavy silence as Layla and Noah followed Christine, making their way toward the front. Though the passengers tried to look busy with their phones or books, their eyes unconsciously followed the 2 siblings. That silence, a silence no one dared to break, carried more than just surprise. It was a silent acknowledgement that everyone who witnessed the scene understood. Something profound had just happened. Layla felt it in every step she took. She walked slowly, as if wrapping all her humiliation into each breath, but also as if affirming one thing to herself: no matter how others look at me, I will walk with my own worth and dignity. Noah walked beside her, gripping the strap of his backpack tightly, his face trying to remain calm, but his slender shoulders occasionally trembled. As the 3 neared the first-class cabin, the atmosphere there grew heavier. Some passengers looked up at them, others turned away, perhaps ashamed of having silently witnessed everything. Christine stopped in front of seats 1A and 1B, seats that rightfully belonged to Layla and Noah from the beginning. She turned around, attempting a smile, but the strain on her face was obvious. "Please, have your seats," Christine said softly, her voice hoarse. Layla simply nodded without speaking. She helped Noah settle into his seat first, then calmly took her own. Her movements were gentle yet firm, as if she was redrawing a new boundary for her self-respect. As Layla sat down, she felt the soft cushion of the seat against her back, but it no longer brought the excitement it once did. Now, it was a silent reminder of how the world operated. Sometimes, to sit in the place you rightfully deserve, you must endure wounds to your dignity. Christine stood awkwardly for a few seconds, as if waiting for a public forgiveness. But Layla only offered a gentle smile, a smile that was light yet resolute, like someone closing an old door before stepping forward. "We're fine now." "Thank you," Layla said, her voice as soft as a breeze, yet carrying a maturity that even Christine had to bow her head to. Without another word, Christine turned away and hurried back to the service area, leaving behind a blend of embarrassment, admiration, and deep reflection in the cabin. Noah turned to Layla and whispered, "Sis, why didn't you get mad at her?" Layla looked at her brother, her eyes a deep well of emotions that had been washed clean. "Anger doesn't change anything, Noah," she said softly. "What matters is knowing who we are, and not letting others' mistakes define us." Noah fell silent, but his eyes shone strangely bright, as if he had just learned something more valuable than any lesson in a textbook. Layla turned toward the window. Outside, the white clouds drifted lazily across the deep blue sky, like a gentle stream washing away the dust of the world. In her heart, the sting of humiliation remained like a fresh scratch yet to heal. But above all, a stronger feeling had begun to blossom, a belief that even if life could be unfair at times, one could still choose to walk forward with dignity and kindness. Far away, Christine stood tucked into the galley, trying to steady her rapid breathing. The cup of coffee in her hand trembled slightly, dark liquid spilling over the rim. Mr. Robinson's words still echoed in her mind. "We do not judge customers by appearance. We judge by facts." Christine closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the overwhelming shame tightening around her pride. The pride she had once believed was unshakable. A part of her wanted to make excuses, to claim it was just a small misunderstanding. But another part, the honest part, forced her to confront a painful truth. She had been wrong. From the very first moment she laid eyes on those two children, she hadn't just insulted Layla and Noah. She had betrayed the very values she once prided herself on representing: fairness, respect, and human dignity. As the flight gradually reached cruising altitude, Captain Michael Simmons switched off the fasten seatbelt sign. A soft chime echoed through the cabin, breaking the tension in the air. Layla tilted her head back, resting against the seat, and closed her eyes. She didn't sleep. She simply listened to, her heart slowing down, as if tucking away all the chaotic emotions into a small, peaceful corner of her soul. Beside her, Noah relaxed as well, occasionally glancing up at his sister, his eyes shimmering with trust. What was supposed to be an ordinary flight had become an extraordinary journey, not only for the Robinson children, but also for Christine Parker, and for anyone who had witnessed the story unfold before their eyes. A lesson in self-respect, a lesson in the consequences of prejudice, and a profound lesson in the quiet power of calmness and compassion. And this was only the beginning of the great changes quietly forming behind that curtain of silence. The early morning sunlight streamed through the small first-class windows, casting pale golden streaks across Layla and Noah's faces. The plane continued to soar quietly through the vast sky, like a tiny boat adrift on an endless ocean. Everything seemed to have settled, but within Layla, an undercurrent was still surging. It wasn't anger, nor was it pure humiliation anymore. It was something heavier, a growing question about justice and fairness. Her father knew about the situation. He had promised to handle it. Yet Layla couldn't help but wonder, would an apology be enough to erase the feeling of being disrespected? Would anyone ever truly understand these invisible wounds? Noah seemed to have calmed down a bit, engrossed in an animated movie playing on the screen in front of him, occasionally letting out a soft chuckle. But Layla was different. She sat still, gazing out at the sky, her mind drifting along endless streams of thought. At the front of the cabin, Christine Parker stood motionless in the galley, absently fiddling with a cold cup of coffee. She glanced at her watch. Over an hour remained before landing. That stretch of waiting had turned into a silent torture. Each time she passed by Layla and Noah's seats, each polite nod to another passenger felt like a tiny blade cutting deeper into the pride she had once believed untouchable. Christine had once been utterly confident in her judgment. She had believed she understood how the world worked, but within the span of a few hours, all those truths had crumbled, exposing a cruel and naive ignorance. In another corner, Captain Michael Simmons quietly received an internal signal. He opened the message, quickly scanning the new directive from the Operations Department. Mr. Brandon Robinson requests coordination with the airport security team. Upon landing, hold all passengers in place. Immediate resolution required before disembarkation is permitted. Michael furrowed his brow, hesitated briefly, then nodded in agreement. A major upheaval was silently unfolding, and the entire plane was about to become witness to an event not easily forgotten. Layla instinctively gripped the armrest as she felt the plane beginning to descend. The overhead announcement chimed on, Captain Simmons's deep voice calm, but carrying a barely perceptible layer of tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land. Please fasten your seatbelts and remain seated after landing until further instructions. We need to resolve an internal matter before disembarkation. A soft wave of murmurs rippled through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged puzzled glances. Others narrowed their eyes, sensing something unusual. Layla felt her heart sink. She didn't know exactly what her father intended to do, but she believed that from this moment onward, things would not simply end with an apology. The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels screeching briefly against the runway before slowing to a steady roll toward the gate. The air inside the cabin grew thick with anticipation. As soon as the plane came to a full stop, a group of uniformed security officers swiftly boarded, their faces grave. Whispers spread like wildfire through the cabin. Christine stood frozen in the galley when she saw the security team approaching. She immediately understood the real nightmare had arrived. One of the officers, his voice firm but maintaining minimal courtesy, spoke. Miss Christine Parker, you are requested to come with us. The Operations Department requires your immediate presence for an internal inquiry at the airport. Eyes throughout the cabin lit up, astonished, curious, and some with a touch of sympathy for the woman struggling to hold onto the last shred of composure. Layla sat quietly, feeling Christine's quick, fleeting glance toward her before the flight attendant bowed her head and followed the officers. There was no shouting, no chaos. Everything unfolded in silence, a heavy, oppressive silence, carrying the full weight of the consequences careless actions could bring. After Christine's departure, Captain Simmons calmly announced, "Thank you for your cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now collect your belongings and disembark according to the crew's instructions." The click-clack of seatbelt buckles sounded throughout the cabin as passengers slowly rose. Though the heavy atmosphere remained, Layla and Noah gathered their belongings unhurriedly. As they walked down the aisle, a few passengers gave them small nods of acknowledgement. Their eyes filled with quiet respect. No words were spoken, but everyone understood. They had just witnessed a living lesson about fairness. A hard-earned lesson few had the chance to experience firsthand. As soon as they stepped out of the plane, Layla spotted Mr. Brandon Robinson waiting nearby, calm, composed, his familiar, steady gaze watching them. When he opened his arms and pulled the two children into his embrace, all the pent-up worries inside Layla burst out in silent tears she could no longer hold back. "I'm here," he whispered, gently patting her back. In that moment, Layla understood. Even though the world outside could be cruel, there would always be those willing to stand for justice, for kindness. And today, she hadn't just learned how to face injustice, she had learned how to become a part of the change. Inside the VIP lounge of the airport, soft lighting bathed the quiet room. Standing in stark contrast to the chaos outside, Layla and Noah sat beside their father, Mr. Brandon Robinson, on a plush gray velvet sofa, their faces still carrying the faint traces of exhaustion after a turbulent flight. Mr. Robinson did not rush to ask questions. He simply sat there, steady and calm, his large hand resting gently on his children's shoulders. Radiating a quiet and steadfast strength, Layla looked up at her father. In her eyes was not only absolute trust, but also a sense of expectation, waiting for something she knew deep down. Her father would not let this matter fade into silence. The glass door slid open softly. A group entered, representatives from the airport's executive board and several senior airline staff members. Leading them was Rebecca Mitchell, the chief executive officer, a middle-aged woman in a neatly tailored black suit. Her face tense though she tried to maintain a calm demeanor. They stopped a few steps away from Mr. Robinson's table, their expressions a mixture of respect and apprehension. "Mr. Robinson," Rebecca spoke, her tone formal. "We deeply apologize for the unfortunate incident that occurred. We commit to conducting a thorough investigation and taking appropriate action against the individual involved." Mr. Robinson gave a quiet nod, but his gaze remained firm and unyielding. After a brief silence, he spoke slowly, his voice deep and clear with each word. "Thank you. But I'm afraid, this time, a simple apology will not suffice." The room fell silent. This was not merely an incident. It was the manifestation of a systemic disease. He continued, his voice not raised, but carrying a force that commanded the full attention of everyone present. The disease of prejudice, the disease of judging people by appearances instead of facts. Layla sat quietly, her heart pounding. She had never seen her father so clear and resolute, yet never had she felt so close to him. Rebecca swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "We have immediately suspended Flight Attendant Christine Parker. She will face a disciplinary board." Mr. Robinson leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp as a blade. "I am not just talking about one individual. I am talking about a culture. If you merely discipline one person and continue on as if nothing happened, then I'm sorry, you will have changed nothing." He paused, letting his words settle heavily in the room. "I demand," he continued slowly, "a comprehensive review of your employee training policies. Mandatory unconscious bias and racial fairness training programs must be instituted, not just for flight attendants, but across the entire system, ground staff, flight crews, and management." Rebecca opened her mouth to respond, but Mr. Robinson's unwavering eyes made her falter, and he added, "I want to see genuine commitment, not polished PR statements, not hollow apologies. I expect regular, public progress reports on the reforms." The room remained utterly silent. No one dared to interrupt. Layla looked at her father, a surge of indescribable pride welling up inside her. This was no longer just a battle for two children. This was a battle for what was right. Rebecca exchanged quick glances with her colleagues, then took a deep breath. "Mr. Robinson," she said carefully, "your demands, frankly, represent a significant challenge. But you are right. If we only treat the surface and fail to change the roots, many more Laylas and Noahs will be hurt." She paused, her gaze meeting Layla's, a look full of remorse, but also determination. "We commit. Starting today, a comprehensive reform program will be established. I will personally oversee its implementation." The atmosphere in the room lightened slightly, though the tension remained. "We also wish to formally apologize to the Robinson family in writing, and publicly announce our commitment to change to all passengers and staff." Mr. Robinson nodded slowly. He was not one to be easily satisfied, but he recognized sincerity when he saw it. "I'll be watching," he said simply. The meeting ended. The executive team quietly departed, carrying a far heavier burden than they had anticipated. Mr. Robinson turned to his children, his gaze softening. Layla squeezed Noah's hand gently, whispering, "Do you think things will really change, Dad?" Mr. Robinson looked at her, his eyes deep and vast as an ocean. "No one can change the whole world in one day, Layla. But if no one starts, it will never change. And today, we have started." Layla smiled, the first truly light-hearted smile she had allowed herself since stepping onto that plane. Outside, the sunlight shone even more brightly. The white clouds floated leisurely across the sky, silent witnesses to a morning when something seemingly small had quietly set in motion, an unstoppable current of change. And Layla knew, even though they were just two small children, she and Noah, through their quiet courage, had helped move it forward. 2 weeks after what had seemed like just another ordinary day, Something very different was stirring in the atmosphere of Skyward Airlines, a change, quiet yet powerful, like an underground current steadily eroding what once seemed immovable. Layla sensed it the very first time she returned to the airport with her father and Noah, this time for a short weekend trip to the beaches of Charleston. As soon as they stepped into the main hall, she immediately noticed the gaze of security personnel. The check-in staff all carried a new kind of attention. Not the old scrutinizing looks, but something different: respect and professionalism. There were no longer those quick, assessing glances, no subtle raised eyebrows questioning whether they belonged there. Instead, Layla was greeted with genuine smiles, polite inquiries that made her feel for perhaps the first time seen as a person, not as a walking question mark. At the check-in counter, a young staff member named Marcus Lee immediately stood up. "Good morning, Robinson family. We have everything prepared for you," Marcus said warmly, without a trace of superficiality. Layla paused for a moment. She could see in Marcus's eyes not gratitude, because her family was important, but a new sense of pride, a quiet confidence that today he was representing an airline striving to do better. Marcus bowed politely, handing over the first-class tickets to Layla and Noah along with a sincere wish. "Have a wonderful flight." There was no hint of discrimination, no hesitation, only pure professionalism and simple kindness. Layla felt something tender bloom inside her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name, but it warmed her heart in a strange, comforting way. When they approached the security gate, everything went smoothly. But this time, a small detail caught Layla's attention. A brand new sign stood proudly at the entrance. Skyward Airlines commitment: no discrimination, no assumptions, only respect. Layla paused briefly in front of the sign. Noah stopped too, looking up at his sister. "Sis," he asked softly, "is this because of us?" Layla smiled and squeezed his hand tightly. "Not just because of us, Noah," she whispered, "but for everyone who has ever been misjudged, and for those who will come after us." Noah nodded, his eyes sparkling with a pride he had never felt so clearly before. That day's flight felt completely different for Layla. When their family boarded the first-class cabin, the flight attendants, now under the supervision of a new chief attendant named Alicia Dawson, welcomed them with genuine bows of respect. No unnecessary questions about their tickets, no silent scrutinizing, only heartfelt hospitality and impeccable professionalism. Alicia herself came over to Layla and Noah, smiling warmly. "We are very pleased to have the Robinson family with us today. If there's anything we can do to make your flight even more comfortable, please don't hesitate to let us know." There was no hint of awkwardness in her voice, only a refined sincerity, enough for Layla to feel real change was happening. As the plane took off, Layla leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes, feeling the gentle shudder of the aircraft cutting through thin clouds. Inside her, there was no longer the uneasy questioning of before. Instead, there was a lightness, as if a heavy stone had finally been lifted from her heart. Not because every problem had been solved, but because she knew she, Noah, and her father had helped start a real change. A change not just at this airline, but in how strangers saw and treated each other. A small seed had been planted, and it was beginning to sprout. Later that afternoon, at a beachfront hotel in Charleston, with the golden sunset painting the sky ablaze, the Robinson family sat together on a long bench facing the ocean. Layla gazed quietly at the crashing waves, her thoughts far deeper than her age would suggest. "Dad," she called softly, "do you think these little changes can really make a difference?" Mr. Robinson put down his coffee cup and turned to look at the little girl he knew was growing every day, not just in body, but in soul. He smiled, his gaze full of warmth. "Layla, the greatest mountains are built from the smallest grains of dust. The widest rivers start from a single drop of water." He gently patted her hand. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person daring to speak up, one kind look, one open door when everyone else turns away." Layla pressed her lips together and nodded slowly. She knew the road ahead was long, The world was still full of injustice. But today, at least, she believed she had helped make it a little better. And for a 16-year-old girl, that was already a tremendous victory. Far off in the distance, the ocean continued its endless rhythm against the shore, like the patient heartbeat of those who never give up believing in change. In the days following their trip to Charleston, Layla felt a quiet energy stirring within her, a new but unmistakable feeling. It was time for her to do something more for the world around her. It wasn't enough just to notice the changes in people's glances and gestures. Deep down, Layla knew that her and Noah's experiences could and should become a guiding light for others, for those carrying silent wounds with no one to share them with. And so, on a peaceful Friday afternoon, in the courtyard of Rosewood High School, Layla decided to speak up. The Community Day discussion was held beneath the sturdy branches of old oak trees. On the school lawn, groups of students gathered on the green grass, chatting animatedly. Initially, Layla only intended to sit and listen, but when the program supervisor, Ms. Martin, unexpectedly called out, "If anyone has a story about fairness, respect, or overcoming challenges, please don't hesitate to share it with the group." Layla felt her heart pounding in her chest. She knew this was her moment, not to seek pity, and certainly not to blame, but to plant a seed, as her father had once said, in young hearts. Still untouched by the world's cynicism, Layla took a deep breath and stood up. The afternoon sunlight streamed through her sleek black hair, forming a soft halo around her, making her look both delicate and remarkably steady. The laughter and chatter gradually died down until all was silent as Layla stepped forward. Layla's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a strange warmth that drew every gaze toward her. "Maybe," she began, "when you look at me today, you wouldn't think that. Just a few weeks ago, I felt smaller than I ever had before." A ripple of curiosity passed through the crowd, but no one interrupted. Layla shared her story plainly, without embellishment, without anger about that fateful flight, about the doubtful glances, about being asked to leave their first-class seats, simply because they didn't look like what people expected. She spoke of the hurt, the way she and Noah had been reduced to a single glance, a snap judgment. Then her eyes slowly brightened as she continued about how she and Noah rose above it, about how her father stood up not just for them, but for those who would walk onto planes after them, carrying fragile hopes for fairness. "When we are treated unfairly," Layla said, her voice trembling slightly but filled with determination, "we have two choices. We can either let that hurt burn us from the inside out, or we can turn it into a small flame, one that lights the way for others." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the gathered students, all listening in rapt silence. "I chose the second way," Layla whispered, but somehow her voice carried farther than any loudspeaker. When she finished, there was a long pause, but it wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind of silence you feel when the hearts around you are quietly, irrevocably changing. Then, suddenly, applause broke out, at first scattered, then spreading like a small wave, not loud, not showy, but enough to make Layla's throat tighten with emotion. She returned to her seat, spotting Noah from across the field giving her a big thumbs up, his face glowing with admiration. Layla smiled, her heart lifting, as if she had shed an invisible burden. But the story didn't end there. The next day, a group of classmates, familiar faces, who had previously been no more than casual acquaintances, approached Layla during lunch. Among them was Sophia, always outgoing, and Ethan, the quiet boy from her math class. "I heard your story yesterday," Sophia began, her eyes sincere. "I never really thought about these things before, but now I realize that sometimes I judge people too without even knowing it." Ethan nodded in agreement. "You really made me think. I want to learn to see people with more understanding, not through assumptions." Layla's heart warmed, not because of the compliments, but because she knew from one small action the ripples had begun to spread. In the following days, Rosewood High organized more discussions about diversity and fairness, not forced, but natural like seeds sprouting when given sunlight and rain. Layla was invited to join a newly formed student leadership group, dedicated to promoting respect and inclusion within the school. Noah wasn't left out either. At his middle school, Noah proposed a We Belong Day, a day for students to share their heritage, their cultures, and take pride in them. Both siblings, each in their own way, were lighting small flames wherever they went. And Layla understood, sometimes, great change begins simply with the right story, told at the right time, to the right hearts willing to listen. One evening, as the sunset bathed the sky in hues of orange, Layla sat by her window, watching the light spill through the trees. She thought back to that flight, to Christine Parker's cold eyes, to their slow, painful walk down the narrow aisle. She realized, if she had chosen silence that day, had bowed her head and let the hurt sink into oblivion, maybe none of these changes would ever have come to life. Layla smiled softly to herself, because she knew in a vast and often indifferent world, sometimes all it takes is one brave heart to begin the change. And she, Layla Robinson, had chosen to be that heart. In another corner of the city, in a small apartment, Christine Parker sat quietly in front of her glowing laptop screen. Outside the window, the sky was slowly changing colors, the sunset fading like a silk scarf gently slipping from the edge of the horizon. It had been nearly 3 months since that flight ended, yet for Christine, the memory remained as vivid as a scar etched into her mind. Every day since that fateful event, she had been forced to confront one simple yet cruel truth: she was wrong. And her mistake had caused harm to people who never deserved it. No more mornings proudly donning her flight attendant uniform. No more laughter-filled flights. Only long evenings, where Christine had to face herself. No more excuses. No more self-justifications. The unconscious bias and social justice training program she was required to attend had, at first, felt like a mere formality to Christine. Just another hurdle to cross before she could return to work. But gradually, as the stories were told, as tears quietly fell during sharing sessions, as she listened to experiences she had never cared enough to notice before, something within Christine slowly began to shift. She remembered one evening in that small classroom when a young black woman stood up and said, "It wasn't the contemptuous looks that killed my self-worth. It was the silence of those who could have spoken up but chose to turn away." Christine sat motionless through that entire session, her heart heavy as if someone had wrung dry every hollow excuse she had once used to shield herself. She began to understand that her mistake wasn't just a momentary lapse, but part of a continuum of unexamined habits, silent prejudices she had never had the courage to face. And today, as the laptop screen illuminated an unfinished draft email, Christine knew there was still one thing she needed to do, something no one had required of her, but something she had to do to ever truly forgive herself. That was, to apologize honestly, from the heart, not to seek forgiveness, not to salvage her career, but to accept that true growth begins with facing one's mistakes without flinching. Christine took a deep breath and placed her slightly trembling fingers on the keyboard. She typed slowly, to Layla and Noah Robinson. "I know that perhaps you no longer think of me, but I think of you every single day. That day, on the flight, I allowed vague biases and old, ignorant assumptions to guide my actions. I was wrong, not because I didn't see your tickets, but because I didn't see you to people fully deserving of absolute respect. I am sorry for making you feel small on what should have been a beautiful memory. I am sorry for letting fear and prejudice win over kindness. And more than anything, I am sorry for becoming a poor example of something that you, with your resilience and grace, taught us all, that dignity does not come from appearances or status, but from who we are inside. I do not expect forgiveness. I only hope that, from the bottom of my heart, you know there is someone out there trying to become better because of the lesson you helped me learn, even under the most painful circumstances. Sincerely and gratefully, Christine Parker." Christine reread every line, her heart sinking with a mix of sorrow and relief. She pressed send. The message disappeared from the screen, but within Christine, something had taken root, a quiet strength born from the courage to finally face herself. A few days later, Christine received a simple message from Brandon Robinson's email address. "Thank you for writing. We believe sincere change is a long journey, and it is always worth it. No grand promises, no erasing the past." But for Christine, it was enough to ease the ache in her chest, like cool, clear water gently seeping into a healing wound. In the months that followed, Christine took active part in community projects, supporting training programs on equality and social justice. She gave talks at schools, places she had once hesitated to enter, burdened by guilt. And in every story she shared, Christine always spoke of Layla and Noah, not with flowery words, but with profound gratitude, of two children who taught her, in the most resilient and silent way, that kindness is not just a choice, it is a responsibility. Across the city, sometimes Layla thought back to that day, that flight. But now, the memories no longer carried a shadow of bitterness. They had become part of her journey of growing up, a small flame she carried inside, warm and steadfast. A flame born from pain, lit by the belief that even mistakes can become fertile ground for goodness, if we have the courage to face them and make amends. And this, Layla understood deeply, was the most important victory of all. One spring afternoon, the sky stretched out in a serene blue, with thin wisps of white clouds drifting like silk ribbons through the warm air. Inside the large hall of the city's community center, brilliant sunlight poured in through the tall glass windows, reflecting off the rows of seats filled with an eager audience. On the stage, a small podium stood at the center, simply adorned with wildflowers, not extravagant, but strong and resilient. It was the day of the Voices for Change event, a newly founded annual forum, honoring stories of courage, kindness, and positive change within the community. This year's special guests of honor, mentioned with deep respect, were two names few would have expected a year ago: Layla Robinson and Noah Robinson. Layla sat in the front row, her light blue dress softly embracing her slender figure, her long black hair neatly tied back. Noah, in a perfectly tailored little suit, couldn't hide his excitement, his eyes sparkling brightly. Mr. Brandon Robinson sat quietly behind his children, his gaze full of pride and a trace of emotion he could not conceal. Layla's name echoed through the speakers. She rose, taking a deep breath, and walked to the stage amid a wave of applause that filled the entire hall. Standing at the microphone, Layla looked out over the crowd. She spotted familiar faces, friends, teachers, new acquaintances, and farther back a woman in a pale beige suit, her eyes intently focused, filled with genuine respect. It was Christine Parker. Layla smiled softly. There was no longer any distance or coldness between them, only two human beings who had walked a long road together to rediscover the good within themselves and the world. Layla began, her voice gentle yet steady. "We often think that great change must come from extraordinary actions, but sometimes change begins in very small moments." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the hushed room. "Sometimes change begins with a look, a question, a moment when someone chooses, instead of judging, to listen." Layla recounted her journey with Noah, not embellishing, not seeking pity. Just an honest story about how two children learned to stand firm against prejudice, refusing to let shallow judgments overshadow their true worth. She spoke of the small discussions at school, of tiny shifts that became rippling waves, of new smiles, handshakes no longer held back, and eyes learning to look at each other's true selves. Layla paused, smiled softly, and concluded, "We can't change everything overnight, but each day, each one of us can choose to plant seeds of kindness, and if enough of us plant them, the world will change." The applause rose like a tide, but in that moment, Layla only saw Noah sitting tall, clapping until his small hands turned red, his eyes shining with pride, and Christine nodding slightly, her eyes glistening with heartfelt emotion. After the ceremony, In the sun-drenched courtyard of the community center, Layla suddenly saw Christine approaching. They didn't speak immediately. They simply stood facing each other amid the bustling crowd. Then Christine spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you, Layla, for everything." Layla looked into those sincere eyes and answered gently, "Not just me, Miss Parker. You too. Thank you for choosing to change." Between them, no further apologies or forgiveness were needed. Because real change, Layla understood, does not come from polished words. It comes from how each person chooses to live differently, day by day. A few weeks later, a special letter arrived at Layla's house. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. "Dear Layla and Noah, we are honored to inform you that beginning this year, the Voices of Courage Scholarship will be awarded annually to students who take positive action to promote fairness and kindness within their communities. The scholarship is made possible through contributions from the employees of Skyward Airlines, inspired by the courage and spirit shown by Layla and Noah. Thank you for reminding us of the most important truth. Kindness is never a small thing." Layla clutched the letter tightly, her eyes brimming with tears. She knew, though the road ahead was still long, though the world outside still held many challenges, today she and her brother had carved a small but everlasting mark into the current of kindness. A seed had been planted, and it would continue to grow far beyond what two children had ever imagined. That evening, on the porch, Layla and Noah sat with their father, watching the sunset cast long shadows across the lawn. "Dad," Noah said, his voice clear and bright, "when I grow up, I want to be someone who helps people see the good." Layla chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. "You've already started, little guy." Mr. Robinson smiled warmly, his gaze deep and tender. "I'm proud of you both," he said, "because you don't just see the good, you dare to make it grow." And in the fading light of the evening, Layla closed her eyes and smiled, because she knew, wherever life would take them, there would always be a fire burning in her and Noah's hearts, the fire of resilience, of kindness, and of an unwavering belief that each of us can make this world better if we begin with ourselves.